Wizards, then. It looks like I am breaking some of my own rules with Wizards. I was thinking all the time, particularly towards the end of Heat Signature, the next thing has got to... The prototype has got to come together, take shape really quickly. And if it doesn't, I should just scrap it and start again and do something totally new. Because my observation was that like Gunpoint clicked really fast and the whole development was smooth, and then Heat Signature didn't click really fast and the whole development was rocky. So it would be worth restarting many, many times in order to hit upon a concept that is smooth from the get-go. I started the Wizards game in October. I've not been working on it full time by any means, but I still don't even have something playable. There have been a couple of times when it's like there have been some enemies and some wizards, and it's possible to kill all the enemies, and it's possible for the enemies to kill you, and new enemies spawn, and it's, basically, okay, this is playable technically. But those prototypes have not proved much really. What you're looking for, what I'm looking for, is some little spark of oh yeah, okay, this fundamental mechanic works well. I am lying to myself in one way by telling myself that I don't need the actual basics to be interesting. I've always been thinking I can just fall back on what XCOM does, or I can just fall back on what Into the Breach does. Those are two games I love in this genre, and what I'm making is not wildly divergent from that template. Heat Signature, the problem was that you can compare it to Hotline Miami or FTL, but it's not really like either of those things in terms of I can't just look at those games and copy what they do, because the game is fundamentally different. So I didn't have a reference point, so every problem had to be solved from first principles, and I would often have to invest a lot of time in a solution, then find out it doesn't work. And the reason I have to invest that time is I haven't seen a game do this before, and so turns out there's a good reason for that in many cases. So with Wizards, you could look at it and say, well, this is a prototype that's taking a really long time, shouldn't you have scrapped the whole thing and started again at this point? And to some extent, I have. I think when I came up with that rule, I was imagining that all the gameplay prototype and a concept are the same thing, because that's usually what I go for. I am, if you wanted to summarize the idea of Heat Signature as go inside spaceships, that kind of is a gameplay mechanic. And so if the prototype of that wasn't fun, I should have started again and come up with a different mechanic. The Wizards game is not a mechanic, it's a theme, and it seems to suit a small-scale tactical game, or at least that's the best fit for this kind of game that I can make within my resources, I hope. But what kind of tactical game and like how it plays is up for grabs, and so I tried one way of doing that, and didn't really fail. I could see a lot of problems ahead. I could see a lot of edge cases and tricky things. My prototype was rough, and the ways in which it was rough, the ways in which it differed from what the final product would be, had important differences, ones that I think might have led to very tricky bugs or logic cases. So I wasn't seeing it wasn't like wildly fun to play or anything, and it also seemed like it might be a difficult road to kind of fix it up. So I did start again, kind of. I've replumbed that prototype now. So to kind of explain what that idea was that I was trying, and I haven't completely left it behind, but I'm trying something else now. It was just that you order every turn all of your wizards, you give them a move order, then an attack order. And then when you click on the next wizard, we rewind in time, go back to the start of the turn, you give that wizard a move order and an attack order, and it unfolds at the same time as the other wizard. So you could theoretically sync them up. One issue with that, the positive of that, the rewind works great, feels really nice. It's also really cool when you do something nice, you can just watch that turn again and again and again, and that's really satisfying. I didn't expect that. But it's possible to sync up the turns, but it's actually kind of arbitrary. It depends, I was hitting problems like, I want this guy to move into position, then this guy to knock the enemy into the other wizard, and that's not happening because the one who's going to knock the enemy arrives first, so he's knocked the enemy before the other one arrives into position. So I needed some way to control the timing of these things in order to sync them up, because that's not just a nicety, a sort of bonus feature. The game wanted to be about synchronization, about timing, and about making sure this thing is in place at this time. And because I've simplified it and made it, you just give a move order and an attack order, you didn't have fine-grained control over that. So you would have to do weird things like intentionally give this guy an inefficient route. Like this guy's going to fire a projectile to cause the knockback, and I would intentionally move him further from the enemy than he needs to be, just so that it would take him longer to get there, so the other guy would be there in time. And obviously that's not going to work. So you could add a wait feature or whatever, but the issue is, in that prototype at least, the pathfinding was very kind of smooth and fine-grained, and that meant that, this guy may not be arriving like 0.5 seconds ahead of time, or a whole second ahead of time. It's going to be like 0.2396 seconds ahead of time, and I could just foresee a lot of fiddliness about that. Plus, those wait orders, where do they go? Can you move, then wait, then fire? And if so, how does the input work for that? And all of that, it's not that I thought that and thought, oh well, then you could never have any kind of system where you can both move, wait, and attack. It's more that if you're going to have a system where you move, wait, and attack, this is not the interface for it. It's this simple two-command thing is not the basis for a game like that. So all of that got me thinking about all of this. If it's all about timing and synchronization and that kind of stuff, then we need to make the timing, the flow of time, really chunky and exact, in the same way that the grid makes positioning chunky and exact. That's one of the things I like in XCOM, and in particular Into the Breach. Into the Breach does a very good job of like everything is on one particular square. The squares are very big. There are only 64 of them, so every movement you make is kind of decisive. Like you're never fretting about like, oh, is that the exact right spot for that guy? It's always either he's in line with the enemy and he can shoot them, or he's not and he absolutely can't. So there's very clear distinctions between this square and that square, which the nice side effect of that is that when you order them to the correct square, you can do so really decisively without having to second guess yourself, and it's just a really nice satisfying, yes, that's the correct spot. So can you do the same thing for time? Time is kind of, in that original prototype, continuous. So the time at which this guy arrives at that square, like I say, it could be 2.3597 seconds. Could we split time up into chunks the same way we split space up into chunks? Which is not a new concept, obviously. And so that's what I've done. It's the time step system, and the idea is that a turn is, I think it's going to be 3 time steps, and when you click on a wizard to give him orders, you are going to, if you want to move him, then you pick one square that's adjacent to him. You can only move 1 square per step, and you click there, they move forwards, anything else that's going to happen in that time step happens. And then you can decide if you want to keep moving them. If your intended move is to move 3 squares, you're going to click 3 times to move all 3 things, will be individual move orders. And that means you can fine-tune your path. So if there was like acid on the ground and you wanted to avoid it, then obviously you're going to be controlling that step by step. Which is, I mentioned acid because that is problem XCOM has, where there's hazards on the ground, but you don't get to fine-tune your path. So the AI of the game has to kind of figure out, oh, you probably want to path around this way. That seems like the best thing to me. But actually, there's all kinds of situations where, like, maybe in this one situation, you really need to just cross through the acid. Or for movement, it gives you more fine-grained control. But also, I would have actions be just the same kind of thing. So you could decide to take 1 step, fire, then take another step. Or what I'd probably do is have like, there's a wizard with like a rocket-propelled gemstone. That's probably going to be, firing that is probably going to cost you more than 1 step. So either you will need 2 steps free, or I might do a system where on your last step you can do an action that costs you more than 1 step. If you do something that costs you more than the number of steps you have left, that ends your turn. You still do it, but it ends your turn. And so that gives you the ability to have like differentiation in the weapons, where that RPG is a slow firing thing. It's going to take a lot of actions to fire it, but the witch cop, for example, might have like a light wand attack where she can fire it 3 times on a turn if she needs to. So she can go 2, 2, 2, hit 3 people. And the key advantage of this is that now the question of whether or not two things happen simultaneously, whether they sync up, is really clear cut. It's like if you're trying to shoot this guy so that he flies into your melee person and the melee person gets a free attack on them, the question of whether or not your melee person is already in place when you knock them back is A, very clear cut. You'll know for sure whether it is. If they're one square off, that's a big deal. You'll know, you'll be able to see, oh, that's not going to make it at all. There's no question of like, in the previous version, you might have a situation where it looks to you like that person is in their way as the knocked back enemy gets... I'm talking about a situation where you knock an enemy into a melee expert who then gets a free attack on them and knocks them out, which is a really satisfying, cool thing. If that melee expert is still on their way to getting into position and they're like 0.3 of the way into the square, then you might feel intuitively that they should get that hit, but the game logic thinks it shouldn't. And wherever you put the threshold, there'll be disagreement there. So splitting it into these time chunks means it's clear cut. Like, if your melee expert is one square away, they 100% will not get that hit. If they're 0 squares away, they're exactly in position, they 100% will get that hit. And there's no ambiguity. So it makes that clear cut, and it puts it in your control. It's totally your fault if the wizard isn't in that point, because I gave you rules that make a certain amount of logical sense. You can move 3 steps in a turn. If you chose not to move 3 steps and spend one of those steps doing something else, and then you don't make it, that's your fault. You are given full control over everything that it makes sense to have control over in order to make these things happen simultaneously. So that is the new prototype. I haven't finished making that yet. I don't know if it'll work. The other reason to do it that way is that I really wanted... Another problem with the old prototype, where it's just move and shoot, was enemy attacks. I was still figuring out how enemy attack should work, but the way it worked in that prototype was just at the start of the turn, they lay down these lines of fire. I'm going to shoot in this direction, I'm going to shoot in this direction, whatever. They're aiming at you, but they don't fire till the end of your turn. And that is trivially easy to get out of the way. Like, they're aiming this way, you just move 1 square to the left, you avoided it. We can do all kinds of other things like fields of fire, where you've got to get out of all of that before, or they'll shoot you. I've actually tried something like that with a Game Maker prototype. That's another thing, I've made a Game Maker prototype, and so I've made 2 prototypes of this game already. So I am starting again. I'm not soldiering on with one prototype that isn't working. I'm sticking with a theme and then making many prototypes for that theme. So the way it felt to me with these enemy attacks was that having them wait till the end of your turn is crippling them too much. That's exactly how Into the Breach works, but Into the Breach is all about saving buildings. We may have elements of that where you're trying to save hostages and stuff, but that's not going to be the core of the game. That's not your primary objective on a mission. There's going to be story reasons for you to be breaking into these places, things you want to steal and do. And so I wanted enemies to attack on your turn, basically. I wanted to, like looking at these lines of fire, stepping 1 square to the left is trivial. And even if it was fields of fire, you can always get to some kind of cover, right? In that system anyway, your movement range was very big. So it felt like I wanted them to attack on your turn. And if we're doing a time step system, then that means you can have enemies kind of have patterns of attack. Like, there can be an enemy that just, for the first 2 turns, he's just kind of charging up his gun, or he's aiming, or whatever, and then on the first 2 steps, he's charging up, and then on the 3rd step, he fires. So you know exactly where he's going to fire, you have all the time to avoid it, but it's a... shut this door. It's a very powerful attack, or it has a very good angle of attack, or whatever, it's hard to avoid. Maybe it's an explosive thing. And then you can have another enemy whose whole turn... This is a very specific thing, but I've had it in my head for a long time. An enemy whose one of his moves is he takes 3 steps, and at each step he fires sideways. So he makes like a row of 3 rows of fire, and on step 1 he's firing here, on step 2 he's firing there, and on step 3 he's firing there. And that means, obviously, like anyone who's in any of those 3 rows gets hit if they stay where they are. But you could also have interesting things where if he's going to fire this way and you're running this way, you might be able to avoid it, so that he fires there, you move there, he fires there, you move here, and you kind of run past his fire, that kind of stuff. There are potential issues with that. It could be tricky to visualize the options you have. That's almost a hidden option. This thing looks like it's hitting all 3 rows. It is, but because of the timing, it may be possible to walk through it. that's not immediately obvious. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's good to have these hidden solutions, but maybe it's counter to the goal of like clarity and all that kind of stuff. But I want to build it to find out. Like I don't want to sit here and guess that that's not going to work and not try it. And also, yes, just so many things I wanted to do with the last prototype were pushing me towards some kind of time step system. So that's what I'm programming right now. So that is, looks like I'm breaking my own rule by sticking to one game idea for a long time without it taking shape. But I'm actually sticking to a theme for a long time, and I'm overhauling or scrapping or redoing large chunks of prototypes until I do hit that core. So when I do hit a core that works, I hope it won't be one that I've been working on for a long time, but I will have been working on the Wizards game for a long time. And then the other reason that I'm sticking with this rather than like scrapping the entire thing is it's a very exciting concept to me, and also it's just had a huge response since we announced it. It's a particular feature of this concept because it's theme driven, not mechanic driven, that we needed art in order to be able to explain the concept. It just, you need to see a wizard, you need to see a tactical operator wearing a robe or holding some kind of rifle made of broken staves to kind of get it. And so we showed art really early, which I don't normally do. Usually I work alone for like a year before I bring on anyone else. But John Roberts is already on board with this, and that creates issues where he's producing art, and I'm not sure if the gameplay is going to need that kind of art, or I might change the whole scale of the game, or if I wanted to make it a top-down 2D thing now, I don't think I could. Like, to some extent I'm constrained. But that level of constraint I think is okay, and also what we get in return for it is so worth it. Like, this is incredible. I've never had this level of excitement and interest in the game I'm working on this soon. Like, it might be a long time for me to come up with a playable thing, but for me to get excitement and interest from the outside world has been record time. This has never happened this fast, or to this extent. And that's not just because you release one game and it's popular and therefore your next game will always get a load of interest. That isn't true. Heat Signature didn't get much interest for a long time, and certainly I was working on this heist game and that got even less interest than Heat Signature, and so that's partly why I went with Heat Signature. But it was like a bunch of people were excited about it, but it was a small group. It was a couple hundred people maybe. I guess that's not a small group in absolute terms, but certainly you hope the audience is going to be bigger than that eventually. And for the Wizards game, it's like we have like 1,000 retweets on the tweet linking to the concept art and just the basic idea. And that's not even saying that we're going to make it. It's like, oh, here's an idea we could make maybe. And so yeah, that level of response is incredibly encouraging and exciting. And yeah, having art this early, that's the payoff, and it's a big payoff.